Today, we'll hear from experts in workforce development and local college leaders, and you will learn about resources available in the new labor market as our economy heads for a full recovery. I would like to recognize the work of Aldia team in bringing together the voices in media that represent the very people that have been disproportionately affected by the pandemic. Thank you to our moderator, Lorraine Ballard Morrell, Director of News and Community Affairs for iHeartMedia. Irvin Randolph, Managing Editor of Philadelphia Tribune, is joining us today. Thank you, Irvin. From New York, WURD Radio, we're glad to welcome Tiffany Bacon and Andrea Lawful Sanders. Also, Miguel Martinez Valle joining us from NBC 10 Telemundo 62. Thank you all for your participation today. To kick off this conversation, it's my privilege to introduce to you the President and CEO of the Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia, Mr. Patrick Harker. Mr. Harker took office on July 1st, 2015, as the 11th President and Chief Executive Officer of the Federal Bank of Philadelphia. In this role, Mr. Harker participates on the Federal Open Market Committee, which formulates the nation's monetary policy. Before taking office at the Philadelphia Fed, Mr. Harker served as the 26th President of the University of Delaware. He was also Professor of Business Administration at the university's Alfred Lerner College of Business and Economics, and a Professor of Civil and Environmental Engineering at the College of Engineering. Before joining the University of Delaware in 2007, Mr. Harker was Dean of the Wharton School of the University of Pennsylvania. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Patrick Harker. Thank you.
Anand, thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for being here. And good morning. It's really great to be here. The kind of research that we're going to be discussing today, I believe, is absolutely critical to building a healthy economy that supports all Americans. Just as important as the work we do at the Fed on monetary policy and interest rates. So I'm very, very pleased to be here today and to see all of you joining us today. Again, thanks for taking the time. I'm also happy to be here on this day in particular. Today is the 156th anniversary of the founding of the Freedmen's Savings Bank, which was created after the Civil War to help develop the financial independence of African Americans following the abolition of slavery. Now, before I proceed, whenever I'm talking about any work that the Fed does, I have to give you this, the standard Fed disclaimer. So the views I am expressing this morning are mine alone and do not necessarily reflect those of anyone else in the Federal Reserve System or on the Federal Open Market Committee. There, I'm covered. So in a few minutes, you're going to hear all about our Occupational Mobility Explorer, a truly exciting tool that I think will help move the needle when it comes to helping to transition people into family-sustaining careers. We know that it's not just a skills gap that's holding many people back, but an opportunity gap as well. The Explorer is designed with that in mind. But before we do that, I think it's worth addressing why the Occupational Mobility Explorer is so important, particularly for Black and Latino communities here in our area and actually all across the country. Simply put, Black and Latino workers are struggling more than others. That's a trend that long predated the pandemic, and that has only been heightened by it. In the state of Pennsylvania, the Black unemployment rate is 17.2%, and the white unemployment rate is 7.8%. Labor participation is also lower among African Americans than other groups. Across the country, the picture looks grimly similar. Nationally, Black unemployment stands at 9.2% versus 5.7% for white workers. Meanwhile, the country's unemployment rate for Latinos is 8.6%. Women across all races have also been severely impacted by the pandemic. Nearly 3 million have dropped out of the formal labor force since COVID-19 struck. Now, even with some hopeful signs as virus cases fall and the economy continues to reopen, I'm concerned. I'm concerned that as the broader economy climbs upward, far too many workers are being left behind. As of late last year, 75% of GDP losses from COVID-19 had been recouped. But only 60% of job losses have been reversed. Those job losses have been concentrated among racial and ethnic minorities and women. We also know that after prior recessions, Black and Latino workers were slower to recover than other groups. Structural barriers have impeded the progress of minorities and women since even before the founding of our country. And today, forces like job segregation, inequality in education, and sometimes even outright discrimination continue to hold back far too many of our fellow Americans. That's why I believe it's imperative that in striving to redress our country's stark inequities, we focus on root and branch reform rather than quick fixes. Here at the Philadelphia Fed, that means our approach acknowledges and examines the root causes of employment disparities, targets interventions to disproportionately affected populations, removes barriers to work, training, and education, encourages improved job quality and supports for workers, and increases access to career pathways that lead to financial stability. Now, look, I'm an engineer by trade. I'm a pragmatist by trade. And as an engineer, though, I know the importance of strong foundations, and that's what we need to build. Building a more equitable economy is not just, in my view, an urgent moral task, but it's an important one for the economy as well. According to my colleagues at the San Francisco Fed, the economic loss owing to racial and gender disparities in our labor market stands at $2.6 trillion. Let me get that number again, $2.6 trillion. The bottom line, quite literally, if we can solve this problem, we can benefit everyone, and because we have a more inclusive economy. A more inclusive economy means everyone can benefit in the long run. That's why today's conversation is so important about helping the incredibly talented people in our region, and we have them all over our region, connect to opportunities, leverage their skills, and connect with training and job placement programs. This is really important work for all of us, and I'm just very pleased with the team at the Philadelphia Fed that we're able to be part of this with all of you. So again, thank you for joining us, and let me now turn this over to my colleague, Keith Wardrip.
Thank you, Pat. It's a real pleasure to be here. My name is Keith Wardrip, and I'm the Community Development Research Manager at the Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia. I'm really looking forward to sharing the results of some recent research and demonstrating an online tool called the Occupational Mobility Explorer. Just like President Harker, I do need to mention that my views are not necessarily those of the Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia or the Federal Reserve System. Before I demonstrate the Occupational Mobility Explorer, I'd like to provide just a little bit of background. The Philadelphia Fed has a long history of conducting research on decent paying job opportunities for the 2/3 of our labor force that lacks a 4-year college degree. But because we know that some people get stuck in low wage jobs, we wanted to ask a research question that we thought we could answer with available data. And that question was, how can workers leverage skills they've gained in prior work experience, essentially to earn a bigger paycheck? Now, when we started this research back in 2019, no one had heard of COVID-19. The unemployment rate was at 3.5%, and employers were having trouble filling open positions. Of course, as Pat described, today we're in a very different economy. Millions of workers are out of work and looking for their next job. And surveys suggest that many of these workers are interested in changing fields. And this might be because their jobs simply aren't coming back. It might be because there are health concerns in the workplace. It could be because of automation. But for whatever reason, there does seem to be interest in changing not just one's job, but in one's occupation. Now, as Pat also mentioned, and as we all know, I think, this recession has been particularly difficult for workers of color. I published a research brief in January focused on employment levels in Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Delaware. And I wanted to better understand which workers had been most impacted by the pandemic-induced recession. And what I found was that employment levels fell most dramatically for 3 groups of workers: Black men, Black women, and Hispanic women, but specifically these workers who had no more than a high school education. A colleague of mine, Kyle DeMaria, released a brief last fall, and in this brief, he estimated which occupations were hardest hit by the recession in the Philadelphia region. And the results of his research suggest that of the 10 occupations that were the hardest hit, both Black and Hispanic workers were overrepresented in 6 of them nationally. So in summary, many workers are currently considering the next phase in their career, and these workers are disproportionately Black and Hispanic. So with that background, here's how we approached our most recent research. We analyzed tens of millions of online job advertisements posted by employers. And we focused specifically on the 25 most in-demand skills for each of the occupations in the 33 largest metro areas. And we concentrated on jobs that didn't require a four-year college degree. And we looked for opportunities for a worker to move from one job to another job that required similar skills, that paid at least 10% more, and again, that did not require a four-year degree. And here's what we found. The first thing we found was that skills are often talked about as a gap, but our research suggests that skills could be viewed as a bridge instead. So skills like communication, organization, customer service, teamwork, collaboration, these skills are just as in demand for better paying jobs as they are for lower wage jobs. Another finding is that roughly half of all the lower wage jobs we analyzed could be paired with another job in the same market that paid at least 10% more and required a very similar skill set. And across the 33 metros that we studied, we found about 4,100 of these types of transitions. And the typical pay increase was around $15,000, from $30,000 to $45,000. So with that background, I'm going to share my screen, if you would bear with me for just a second as I toggle between applications. All right, so combined food prep and serving workers. I'm just going to call these fast food workers for short. When I click Start Path, what you'll see is some information on that job itself. So on the far left, you can see that fast food workers, there are about 63,000 jobs in the Philadelphia region, with annual median wages of around $15,000, well below the poverty line, even for a family of two. And then to the right, you can see what's 10 occupations that share the most similar skills. They're labeled, it's labeled first destinations. We talk about origin occupations and destination occupations. And in these boxes in the destination column, you'll see what we call a similarity score. It ranges from 0 to 1, and the higher the score, the more similar the required skill set. We typically use a threshold of around 0.75 to identify jobs that are very similar in skills, and you'll see that there are quite a few of them with a similarity score above 0.75. I'm going to scroll down and select bakers. I'm going to add bakers to this career pathway. And then the next column that pops up in the second destination column, these are the 10 jobs that have the skill sets most similar to bakers in Philadelphia. Now, moving from fast food workers to bakers would produce a wage increase of roughly $76,000. Well, I'll go ahead and add supervisors of food preparation and serving workers to the path, which would produce an increase of another 61%. You'll notice the similarity score is a little bit below that 0.75 threshold, suggesting that maybe a little more training would be required to make this transition. And then in the third and final destination, this allows for 4 steps along the pathway. We get to food service managers. In total, you can see that a worker can move from fast food to food service managers, and with a little bit of training and experience along the way, more than quadruple their wages from $15,000 to roughly $69,000. Now, I'll admit that there aren't too many of these steps in the pathway that are surprising. They're all in food services, but I'm going to start a new path that I think will produce a few more surprises for you. All right, and we're going to, again, go to Philadelphia and select cashiers. Another occupation that employs more than 60,000 Philadelphians, wages again around $15,000, and has been hard hit during this recession. If I select customer service representatives with a similarity score of 0.75, you'll see it employs over 60,000 workers and would raise wages from $15,000 to $37,000. I'm going to scroll down just a little bit in the second destination to select credit counselors with a similarity score over 0.7. And then human resources specialists is the second in the last column. So I think, at least for me, whereas the first example the pathway was fairly unintuitive. Was fairly intuitive. You can see that the transitions in the second example are a little more surprising, from cashiers to customer service reps, credit counselors to HR specialists, very different types of work. And again, with some experience and some additional training along the way, more than quadrupling the wages where we started for cashiers. And the second thing I'd like to show you, the second tab on this tool, is the Compare Skills tab. I will again start and select Philadelphia as our region. Let's start with maids and housekeepers. And we can compare the top 25 most in-demand skills for any pair of occupations in the Philadelphia region. I'm just going to select computer user support specialist. What comes up is a bar chart that shows the 25 most in-demand skills for both occupations. And where both occupations require the same skills, they're listed together at the top of this chart. And the percentage indicates the share of employers asking for a given skill. You can see a lot of these are those soft skills or 21st century skills that I mentioned earlier: communication, organization, customer service, problem solving, teamwork. But there, as you would expect, there are quite a few differences in required skills. Housekeepers, of course, need to be able to clean, do laundry, etc. Computer support specialists provide technical support and are familiar with Microsoft Office and Microsoft Windows. It's not to say that a housekeeper could not transition, or a maid couldn't transition to a computer support specialist, but because the skills don't overlap much, more training might be required. But if I change the second occupation to supervisors of housekeeping and janitorial workers, as you'd expect, we see a much greater overlap in skills and a much smaller difference, a much smaller gap. At the bottom in orange, you'll see skills that are required for supervisors of housekeepers that the housekeepers themselves don't need. Skills like budgeting, staff management, supervisory skills, planning. These are skills that I think employers could help their workers develop, could invest in their workers, and allow them to move up the ranks within the corporation and earn a bigger paycheck, sort of following the hire, train, and advance model. That would be good, probably for the employer, but definitely for the workers themselves. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen now and just close with a couple of thoughts, a couple of policy and program innovations that I think spring from the research, and I would love to hear more from the panelists about these ideas. And the first is targeted training. So a bachelor's degree may not be required to make these transitions that are embedded in the research and that I've demonstrated on the tool, but certainly some kind of skills training, education, or additional on-the-job experience might be necessary in order to help a worker succeed in their next job. And this training could happen, could be conducted by a community college, a workforce development organization, or by the employers themselves. And by focusing on occupations that require very similar skill sets, we think the training could be of a shorter duration. And the second is the need for a widespread recognition of the transferability of skills. And I think this is probably pretty obvious and intuitive for workers. I know I've developed skills in some jobs that I've taken with me to others, but it's vital that employers share in this recognition, even if the skills were gained in seemingly different occupations, like cashiers, customer service reps, and credit counselors. Skills-based hiring could be an important strategy for employers to create a more diverse workforce, but it's only going to work if the employers can identify the specific skills they need in a job, they drop any unnecessary credentials, and then they commit to assessing applicants on these skills, or they accept proof of skill attainment like certificates or digital badges. So I'd like to thank everyone for their time, and I'll now turn it over to our moderator, Lorraine Ballard-Morrill, Director of News and Community Affairs for iHeartMedia.
Thank you, Keith, and welcome to all of those who are joining us online. I'd like to invite all of you to share your thoughts on social media with the hashtag Aldea Live and Equity in Recovery. Even before the COVID pandemic, Philadelphia has been a tale of two cities: gaining population, rejuvenated neighborhoods, construction everywhere. At the same time, we see neighborhoods with empty factories, trash on the street, violent crime. Despite the resurgence, Philadelphia remains the nation's poorest big city with a poverty rate of nearly 24%. The face of poverty is also changing. A significant number of poor are working but don't make enough money to pay for shelter, and food. What if there was a way to leverage a worker's current skill set to find a better opportunity? Keith outlines some of the ways in which that can happen. Today, we'll hear from local college leaders to discuss educational resources and representatives from NBC 10, Telemundo 62, and Aldea, who will share their stories of the struggles of workers, especially during COVID. Joining us in this section are Dr. Guy Generals, president of Community College of Philadelphia, Dr. Mary Ellen Caro, who is president and CEO of Pierce College, Miguel Valle Martinez, reporter for NBC 10 and Telemundo 62, Hernan Huatacao, editor-in-chief and CEO of Aldea News, and Keith Wardrip rejoins us, Community Development Research Manager, Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia. So my first question goes to Dr. Generals and Dr. Caro. How have colleges adopted this skills-based framework for career preparation and education? We'll begin with you, Dr. Caro.
Thank you, Lorraine. And Keith, you set up beautifully the framework for my response. Pierce College serves a population that is predominantly Black women in their mid-30s and very much affected by the pandemic, but in general affected by the digital divide and the issues that we face. Even before the pandemic began, we were hearing feedback from employers, much like the research, Keith, that you presented, that they were looking for skills that mapped to jobs. They were looking, in some cases, for degrees or not, but they were looking for those folks to be employed and if they expressed a commitment to diversity, to be able to hit the ground running. As a result, we began to develop programs like Careerbridge, which is a program that's modular in nature, is 16 to 20 credits, and often involves an industry credential or certification, and takes the information now that Keith walked through, linking it back to the individual, identifying the skill gaps. And what we're doing is putting together that learning experience, which for the most part is credit bearing for an individual. And we'll be introducing this in addition to our degree programs. So that's the way we're working with employers to try to help, in particular, this population segment get back to work or improve their working condition to find sustainable wages.
Dr. Generals?
Sure, if I can just pick up on Dr. Carroll's ideas about modularizing. We too are also modularizing our curriculum, both in the credit as well as the non-credit areas. Specifically, we have the tool, an apprenticeship tool referred to as career readiness registration, whereby students are able to get micro-credentials in specific areas that will ultimately culminate in a set of skills that will lead to some type of either better training or job opportunity. In our non-credit division, which is the area that's most prominent in terms of short-term certificates and the opportunities for students to move from training into the job market very quickly, we've made a huge effort in stacking credentials. So a student that will come into, for example, our welding program, if they go through our welding modulars, which is 600 hours, it will take them about 6 to 9 months. They can then parlay up to 20 credits into our business leadership program, our technical studies program. We think an underlying theme in everything we do is to enable students to find a pathway and to a more prosperous future for themselves and not lock them into a particular area of training. Some of the onboarding ways that we allow them to get into our training as well as into ultimately the job market is by giving them examination credit by examinations. So if a student, for example, specifically, we know that Latinx and largely students of color are in the hospitality and the tourism business. We know that they pick up a lot of skills by working in restaurants and working in hotels. Those skills can then be parlayed into credit hours at the college, whereby they can then pursue a restaurant management or hospitality program and ultimately lead into some type of management position. So those students, we know that in the pandemic, many of them lost their jobs because it was those direct human contact positions that were most affected by the pandemic that couldn't be couldn't have a digitalization response. So we are positioning ourselves to help those students, to identify them, first of all, to enable them to understand that the college is open and we're prepared to help them to be able to strengthen the skills that they have and to improve those skills and move them into a pathway into the workplace. So credit by examination, competency-based learning, understanding what they know and translating that into college credits so that they can then pick up the credentials that they need to be able to move into the job market, both in the short term as well. Ultimately, if they want to pursue an associate's degree and ultimately a bachelor's degree. That's the strategy that's being employed now.
All right, great. Thank you. A reminder to our audience that you can ask questions or make comments in the chat, and we'll try to respond to as many as we can. We opened hearing about racial equity. Patrick Harker did touch on the impact of the lack of equity on Black and Latinx workers. To you, Dr. Generals and Dr. Caro, how have you seen this in the students that you serve, and how are you addressing that gap of equity?
It's a serious problem, and I think someone mentioned that it didn't just begin with the pandemic. There was inequities before the pandemic hit. The pandemic exacerbated the problem. So we're trying to deal with it in terms of doubling down on our support for students, understanding that their ability to succeed really requires a level of stability in their lives and their self-esteem and their purpose relative to how education will ultimately enable them to be successful. So for example, we have a Center for Male Engagement, which is a center that helps students deal with some of the social, economic, and racial dynamics that they have to deal with as students of color. We have a women's center. We received over $1 million grant from the federal government, C Campus, that helps women. Not that women are the only ones that have childcare issues, but in this case, helps women to identify and to be able to be provided with the support that they need to be successful. And we really appeal to the community in terms of what we refer to as CCP Cares, which is a program designed to help students meet those basic emergency needs that they have, which, you know, you could argue that that's not a Black or brown thing, but the reality is when 70 to 75% of your students are Black and or brown living in Philadelphia, they are the ones that have these struggles. So we try to support them, to give them basic support needs. We try to create a climate and environment that focuses on issues of race and racial dynamic and sexual identity dynamics so that students are comfortable and they're welcome when they come here. So that's a part of our basic strategies for the educational paradigm that we try to create here at the college.
Great. Dr. Caro.
You're on mute.
You need to unmute your microphone.
Yes, it doesn't help unless you can read lips. Thank you. Dr. Generals hit on a number of the initiatives that we've undertaken at Pierce. And the key point I think that he made was the need for more support and the fact that the pandemic exacerbated the situation. What we found and what we're responding to was the following. Our students were dealing with time management. So remember, our student base, average age 35, often single head of household and women of color. They were finding out that they did have the child care issues. All of a sudden, they were doing homeschooling, they were managing elder care, and they were, if at all possible, remotely managing their jobs. So the first thing that we saw was a difficulty in trying to access the internet. And in response, we distributed a number of PCs. Most of us who are working remotely find how difficult it is if you have multiple kids accessing the internet as well as looking for a PC. And we found that went a long way to help many of our students. We also find that the financial needs increased. Now, most of our students take advantage of Pell and financial aid anyway, but during this time, we have just seen a dramatic increase in basic needs support. So as a result, we established emergency funding for students. We were funded by various sources to augment that, and found that for those students that we could help pay their utility bill, deal with some of their issues, they were able to stay enrolled. We offer 6 sessions a year of 7 to 8 weeks, and our students were saying, we need to take a session off. I can't keep up with my bills and so forth. But just by being able to apply that need, we found that 88% of the students that received that emergency funding were able to stay enrolled. And they were actually able to achieve a GPA of over 3.0 3.0 out of 4.0, which we thought were just amazing results in light of it. It's a small group, but nonetheless, we think it demonstrates the importance that that kind of funding, and I'm talking about funding up to $1,000 a student for things that are not necessarily education-based, provided them with the ability to stay in school. And also, more than ever, we found that our students needed a listening ear. They needed access to mental health counseling. They needed to be able to talk to faculty that understood the situation and were able to provide them additional time. We went to a pass-fail approach for last year's session because we thought that could alleviate some of the stress on our folks, and we found that that contributed as well. So it's really, as Dr. General said, a multifaceted approach that needs to be geared to your students, who they are and what do they need. And also, I would submit, it needs to be dynamic, evolving and unfolding as we begin to see what the short-term and long-term effects are from this pandemic.
Journalists are storytellers, and this question goes to Hernan and Miguel. You have been covering the impact of this pandemic on the ground. What have you seen and heard about the disparate impact on Black and Latinx workers? I'll start with you, Hernan.
Well, I can tell you from my personal experience, I don't do much reporting anymore, but I can tell you that the impact of the pandemic in the Hispanic community in the area that I'm familiar with here in the city hasn't been any different from what we've been experiencing for the past 20, 30 years. Adversity is the name of the game all the time. There is limited economic means, there is limited education in some cases, but there is that spirit of struggle, of resilience, of trying to overcome. It was part of something else that I've seen all over my experience in the Hispanic community in the city, and I had to relate to you the personal experience that I had in looking at immigrant families in the city that have, in the absence of having that secure job, have taken the path of becoming entrepreneurs in the city. You know, there is an attitude of trying to change their circumstance by their own means, and many of them have become entrepreneurs. I can relate to one specific example of a immigrant family from Mexico that came to Philadelphia years ago. The husband started working for a restaurant in Philadelphia. Yeah, some of them are good at providing services in those places, but at one point, way before the pandemic, he said, why not start my own restaurant? And he went and opened his own place in South Philadelphia. Now he's a thriving place that has even grown as a result of the pandemic. He does a lot of deliveries all over the city, and I'm one of the favorite, one of the clients that favor that restaurant all the time because I'm impressed with their attitude. Their kids are now going to college. You know, they're now coming of college age, and they're going to college just because I had the means to send them to college through the simple American activity of becoming an entrepreneur. Mm-hmm. So I feel that the pandemic is affecting all of us, no doubt about it. Some people in this panel or the panel tell you more stories about that, but I would like to kind of focus on the positive aspect of this. We've been tried before. This is nothing new to us. We have overcome by just simply taking what probably is the most central aspect of our attitude when it comes to this country. We want to overcome, we want to improve our lot, we want to see our children see a better life, and the fact that we've been challenged by this current circumstance in nothing new is like good opportunity for us to even find better ways of becoming creative and finding solutions for the challenge.
Right. I think that's a very good point. There are many people of color who've lost faith in the ability to maneuver through typical job paths and create their own opportunities through entrepreneurship. Miguel, I wonder if you can also share with us what you've seen as you've been covering this issue on the ground.
Yeah, so I mean, I've been out on the streets since, the first shutdown, right? Almost a year ago today. And it does impact the Black and Hispanic community, especially those people that were working in service jobs, in service industries. And I remember there was a point in the summer when the city was talking about first opening back indoor dining, allowing people back inside, or even as the city was allowing restaurant owners to put tables outside, where every step of the way, the big issue was so many people had lost their jobs because, they were working in the service industry and were still, either now taking care of their children at home, helping with Zoom, learning, or were, very, rightly so, afraid and nervous about going back to work because of COVID, that a lot of business owners were telling me, listen, even if we do open 100%, we don't have the staff to be able to run that. It does seem like that's, the problem itself. People are getting more comfortable going out to work because of different steps that owners have been taking for safety and different steps that the city's been taking for safety. But people were nervous because the exposure there is bigger. And so I think you don't only see how in a split second you can lose your job and the way that you're providing for your family, but then on top of all these other issues, you see how unsustainable sometimes that job can be. And so what I'm really excited about in this conversation is, using that tool that we were shown, that you can go from a service job to how you can get into HR and curing the different programs to a lot for that kind of training in the future, just so that, as these communities that, we are so impacted by this can have in the future through some training, the opportunity to ride out this pandemic with a steady job, with knowing that they can both provide for their kids, take care of their kids as they're learning in the home, and still bring home a paycheck. And because that has been time and time again, when I talk to these parents, they're forced to make that decision. Am I going to leave my kids alone and hope that they're taking their schooling seriously? Or am I going to stay in the home with them, but then give up the opportunity to bring home a paycheck to my family at the end of the week?
Great. I have a kind of a combined question for everyone, really, and that is, how are colleges adjusting to the new normal? Jobs and job trainings, much of it's virtual. And how is our move towards virtual learning and virtual jobs impacting the future of employment? Miguel, do you have some thoughts on that? And then we can turn it to the rest of our panel.
That's really, that's a great question, because that's kind of where my mind is going to. How are we going to train as we're, wanting to get people from point A, the job that they're in now, to a more sustainable, better paying job? How are these positions being shifted in case this happens again? Because at this point, we can't pretend that this COVID pandemic was a one and done. I mean, I hope it is, obviously, but we have to be ready for everything. And I think a lot of parents and a lot of families and a lot of young people that are now looking to get into the workforce are thinking that. What happens if there's another shutdown? What happens if I have to work from home again? Or if there's a family emergency and I have to take care of my family? Do I have the skills, and is the position that I'm in going to still exist if I can't be face to face with a human being? So I would have that same question. Are colleges taking that into account and providing virtual learning opportunities or training opportunities for jobs that will still be around?
Right, great. Dr. Generals, Dr. Caro, what are your thoughts on that? Not only in terms of how you've had to pivot during this COVID pandemic, but also how the COVID pandemic is sort of shaping the future direction of employment. And Keith, you can jump in on that one as well.
Let me start and maybe then turn it over to Dr. Generals. For us, we have always offered all of our courses online. And what we had with them was a complement where a student could choose to come on a weekly basis on site, called Pierce Fit. With the pandemic, we went exclusively to online, and we found almost immediately that students were missing that interaction. It was asynchronous at first. What we did was very quickly implement with our faculty synchronous modules into these courses so that students would have the opportunity, and we made it optional so that students who had to juggle once again their schedules didn't have to change those, but we provided an opportunity for them to engage with the faculty member as well as the other students in this way, like we're engaging today. And that seemed to go a long way. Now, we have been operating remote ourselves as a college, and that has certainly taught us more about how to function, what processes need to change, but also what are those things that our students, which are adult students, will need in the workforce. So we're adding to our curriculum things like remote management. How do you supervise teams that are operating remotely, realizing that the very essence of some of our leadership courses need to evolve to serve our students better in the future. And I don't think we'll look the same coming back. It's not a question of when do we get back to normal, it's what does new normal look like.
Right.
And we are seriously looking at what does a physical presence look like for us? Are workers coming back to the city, or are they, still going to be at home? And how can we be where they are for physical connection, as well as continue to serve in this synchronous fashion for those that want that as well.
Great. Dr. Generals, interesting talking about synchronous, asynchronous, asynchronous meaning work on your own time, synchronous live and in virtual person. So Dr. Generals, what are your thoughts on that in the future?
So I think Dr. Carroll hit it on the nose that we've demonstrated the capacity to provide online instruction writ large across the campus, services, direct instruction, support services. But I fall in the school of thought that necessarily should not be the new normal, where it replaces what we've done. I think we should take the opportunity and the knowledge that we have to augment what we've always done, we meaning higher ed for 350 years, 400 years. I don't think we can remove the human dynamic to teaching and learning. We cannot do that, whether it's in higher education or K-12. We can focus on the very practical, dollars and cents P&L aspect of streaming down and just providing online instruction. But I think that's a huge mistake. I think we, at our own peril, we underestimate the power of the human dynamic. And I think there has not been enough conversation about what's missing in terms of student engagement, student faculty engagement, student engagement in K-12, because I'm worried about what's coming up through the pipeline through high school. Those adolescents that haven't had sports or music or interaction with teachers, or have transitioned through adolescence without the personal contact that they would get with teachers. I think that could ultimately be a problem. And our conversations about the new normal need to extend beyond just the fact that we can do it. We moved 2,000 courses online in 10 days, so we can do it. We moved all of our support services, counseling, advising, registration, online in a matter of days. We've provided, almost 2,000 laptops to students, so we can do it. But that's not where we should reside. We need to take this opportunity to learn what we can do and augment. So now we know we can provide advising online. We can provide counseling online. We could do hybrids, as Dr. Carroll has said. Hybrids should extend the educational platform and not restrict it. So that's the school of thought that I'm coming down on. And I think those conversations need to take place relative to how do we take this opportunity to improve not to replace, not in lieu of what we've done for the last 400 years.
Ah, very good. Keith, I'd like to just skip to a final question, which is what advice would you give people who are listening today who are looking to not just get back to work, but to connect to better, higher paying opportunities?
Sure. So I would say that the experts on this panel and the organizations they represent are fantastic resources for those in the Philadelphia region. You know, if the research that we've produced, if the tool that we've developed might be helpful to an individual worker, to a community college, to guidance counselors, to anybody in the workforce sector and the ecosystem writ large, you know, we would love the opportunity to demonstrate the tool, to talk about the research more and to help put it into action. Because at its core, our research is designed to be applied and to have an impact in the communities we serve.
That is great. And I'd like to thank all of our panel members in part one of this discussion. Dr. Guy Generals, President, Community College of Philadelphia, Dr. Mary Ellen Carroll, President and CEO of Pierce College, Miguel Valle Martinez, reporter for NBC 10, Telemundo 62, Hernan Watakau, who is editor-in-chief and CEO of Aldea, and of course, Keith Wardrip, who is Community Development Research Manager for the Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia. Thank you all for joining us in this segment of this very important discussion on going back to work, leveraging your skills to find better opportunities.
Right.
And now I'd like to invite our next set of panelists to turn on your microphones and your cameras. In the second part of this Aldea Federal Reserve Roundtable Back to Work, Leverage Your Skills to Find Better Opportunities, we're going to be discussing training resources. Joining us are Rafael Arizmendi. He's Vice President of Education and Workforce Services for Congreso de Latinos Unidos, Alia Sutton Bay, who is Director of Operations and Youth Development, HopeWorks Camden, Andrea Lawful Sanders, a host at Word Radio, Tiffany Bacon, also a host at Word, and Irv Randolph, Managing Editor of the Philadelphia Tribune. So I'd like to kick off this discussion with Alia and Rafael. Tell us a bit about your work, the people that you serve, and how you are helping to close the opportunity gap that we've just discussed. Alia, can you begin?
Sure. HopeWorks Camden is a employment social enterprise. We train youth and young adults between the ages of 17 and 26 in IT and GIS, Geographic Information Systems. And then we hire them in our businesses. We operate a web development company and a GIS company, and we hire them for 6 months as an internship. And then we place them in competitive employment with our employer partners. They also earn 12 credits from the training that can be transferred to Camden Community College. And we're closing the gap because we are training in IT, and we found that IT is a resilient sector, and that these jobs were traditionally locked out. African Americans and Latinx folks were locked out of these jobs. And so now we're opening the doors to those opportunities.
Okay, great. And Rafael.
Thanks, Lorraine. It's a pleasure to be here. Congreso de Latinos Unidos is located in Eastern North Philadelphia, and we serve approximately like 15,000 community members. As you know, the North Philadelphia area is an area that it has a lot of poverty, and we're based there to support our students, our community. Specifically in the workforce development area, we have 2 programs that are supporting people to get job. We have what is called the CDLA credential. It's a commercial driving license, so they can, you know, if you get it, you can drive those big tractor trailers. We have beautiful partnership with organizations like FedEx Freight, Cisco, and other big companies. And we also have what we call the Human Services Pathway. It's basically a credential received through Temple Harrisburg on strengths-based family workers. And they are ideal for people that would like to help other people and work in the nonprofit environment. We also work with kids and adult education to support the community overall, but focusing on workforce, these are the main programs that we have right now.
I'd like to remind our audience that you can use the Q&A function in the Zoom to ask questions and also share resources that you might have for job seekers. Turning to Andrea and Tiffany, as I mentioned before, journalists are storytellers, and you also interact with the community through the medium of radio and broadcasting. And I wonder if you can tell us about the stories that you hear on the ground about how people are making this career pivot after being impacted by the pandemic. Andrea, you want to kick it off?
I was deferring to Tiffany, but
Oh, okay.
as the expert that has always been here before I even got on board. But good morning, everyone. So I host a radio show called The Source on WURD Radio on Mondays, Tuesdays, and Thursdays from 1 to 4 p.m. And the biggest strand that I use is education. Really putting people together to figure out what they're doing with their lives, how we can find solutions for them. And when the pandemic hit, I really pivoted, right? So Dr. Generals will understand, because I highlighted community college 1,000 times. Just about once a month, I put up the community college and the amount of programs that they're offering. I now have Dr. Carol in my back pocket, so expect to hear get an email from my producer soon, because I'm thinking of the things that will continually help our people. We know what the statistics are saying, but we also know that, and I talked about this briefly, that not only are the people in the service industry being impacted, but the folks who have gotten college degrees, who have done all they needed to do, the pandemic hit, and those Black and brown folks are struggling like nobody's business. So on The Source, I highlight the people who have a job, maybe working at the Philadelphia School District, lost their job, are now entrepreneurs. And, you know, a couple of days ago, I highlighted a woman from Baltimore Avenue, in West Philadelphia, that owns an African-centered store. And she reached out to me via Instagram. I had her on WURD. She's made thousands of dollars. People just started showing up, right? So we understand that the power of our microphone is so that we can help people to move forward. We have folks coming on from Drexel University who have a job hub program that is actually free for people. So if you want to transfer your skills from what you were doing and you can't find that job, you know, we invite those folks to come on and give people the information that they need. Aaliyah, Lord, I'm looking to you too. So I literally, as I see folks that are doing the work and elevating our people to get them where they need to be, because the statistics are really grim. And then there are the college students who went to college, did everything that was right, and then they lost their jobs in the pandemic. I was sharing with them that my youngest son has not been hired. He lost his job in December of 2019 from this pandemic, not gotten a job. And what he did was pivoted and is now a brand ambassador for all sorts of brands around the country, and is now making more money than when he had a regular job, right? So our young people, we have to find ways to help them to pivot and move forward in this society. We also know for Black and brown people that we don't ordinarily have one job, right? I don't know a Black person or a brown person that has one job trying to make it work. And so the goal is to continue to support them and move them through so that they can get the certifications. If you're an entrepreneur, go to CCP or Pierce College, wherever you can get it, the help that you need to get the certifications so that you can trademark your stuff, right? Have a good business account, understanding what that means to have business insurance, because we're also impacted in a way that we're just busily trying to make the money. We don't think about the business side of it. So on The Source, we teach them all of that. That was a mouthful. I'm going to now defer to Tiffany.
Well, thank you, Andrea.
You're so welcome.
Yeah, so those are some great examples of pivoting during this pandemic. Tiffany, what about you? You get to speak to the people through the work that you do on Word. Tell us more.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you, Andrea, for everything you said. I also host The Source, but on Fridays from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. And just like what Andrea was saying, I've had the opportunity to speak with so many people who just said, you know what, my job isn't my job anymore, or I've been furloughed. Let me figure out what I need to do. And I've had the honor of talking to a lot of people who were able to pivot, and playing their stories on air encouraged those who did not know what to do. There were a lot of people who were just stuck. Like, this is what I do. I put a lot of energy into my business. There were several people who literally just opened businesses maybe a week or two before the shutdown. So they were really feeling the pinch of, I spent all this time building this business and now I can't even open my doors. But having folks who said, you know what, let me take this skill, let me take this other thing that I do and fold that into my daily life. Let me put more time into that. Figuring out what you have at your disposal. So there were a few people who said, you know what, okay, I've been furloughed, but I like to bake. People love my pastries. So they just started baking and sell, put up a little web page and started selling things online. So I saw a lot of that. I heard about a lot of stories like that. People sewing masks, making a killing on masks, people watching, doing whatever they need to do, or finding out more about these online jobs that they didn't think about before. They started looking to places like LinkedIn to make more connections for online work. So now people are doing reception work online because their job is closed. They finally got their car together. So now they're, doing Uber Eats, or they're finding ways to make it work. And it has been very inspirational to those who really were at a loss, who really did not know how to pick up the pieces because everything fell apart so quickly.
Thank you so much. Those are some great stories. And it does speaks to how creative we are and innovative we are in dealing with adversity and turning it into opportunity. So back to Alia and Raphael, this is a great example of people pivoting. And I wonder if you can talk about how your programs have had to pivot during the pandemic. We've been talking a lot about digital learning. What are some of the challenges and also some of the opportunities for your programs? Raphael, start off with this question.
Yes, thank you. Yes, I think that's similar to, any organization. We were forced to immediately pivot. We start, transitioning some of our training programs into a virtual fashion. We have been able to complete many of those programs successfully. Our students are getting the credentials. So there is a lot of innovation using new tools, similar to what we're doing right now, using kind of the Zoom technology, using all of these resources that we had before, but maybe we weren't using it. When we talk about challenges, it's a little bit, it gets complicated. We live in our neighborhood. We may have families that live, maybe 5, 6 people at home. 3 of them maybe, K through 12 students trying to log into the slow internet. And there is that digital divide. So when you have all that environment and you put it together, for example, it could be difficult for some of our students to concentrate and to have that space in that, peace of mind to really to focus on your training. So these are additional challenges. As some of the other participants have said, when there is also some food insecurity and you cannot go out, some of our, students have faced the challenge that they know that I need to go out to help my family and I can do it because I'm in that age range. However, they are living with mom and maybe grandpa. And then the risk is, well, if I go outside and I get COVID, what will happen with grandma and grandpa? So these are like a really tough decision that continue to be a challenge. Things are getting better with the COVID, but these are kind of the reality that we have seen in the community that is, a lot of Latinos and Black and African American that are located in that area.
Right. I actually want to go back a little bit and speak with Irv. Irv, the Tribune has been doing amazing work covering the pandemic, covering the impact on communities of color. And I wonder if you can also share with us some of the stories that you're hearing on the ground about people making this career pivot after being impacted by the pandemic.
Sure. Well, good morning. I'm a strong believer in solution journalism and not just talking about the problem, but solutions to the problem. And what we've been doing, along with talking about the individual stories and struggles that people are having during this pandemic in terms of work, and also our business people, Black and brown business people, we also add that they are also suffering disproportionately. And so what we try to do is direct people to the resources and the programs that will help them pivot and prepare for the jobs that that are in demand, jobs, STEM jobs are in demand, the jobs that are in the chain supply, such as logistics and trucking, jobs in healthcare. I think it's really important that we shift to information that will empower people and let them know that these resources are available, the programs are available, the information for small businesses. We recently had a story about the Chamber of Commerce of Greater Philadelphia have a new program for those workers who were displaced by the pandemic and automation, particularly Black and brown people. And they're looking to train 5,000 people within the next 2 years and connect them to jobs, particularly jobs in the areas that have the greatest growth opportunity, such as entrepreneurship, health tech, and administration and information technology. So in addition to writing about the individual struggles and the problems, which we all know, what we try to do is also point them to some solution so that our people can move forward.
I think that is really the power and the value of institutions like the Philadelphia Tribune, like Aldea, like Word, like Power 99 and WDAS. These are all mediums that are very specifically targeted and responsive to the needs of the community and often able to provide information that is not shared elsewhere. So we want to thank all of you for all the amazing work that you do to reach our communities. Back to Alia about the pivoting in terms of your programming. Tell us how you've pivoted and what are the ups and what are the downs around all of that?
Sure, very much like Raphael, making sure that we were able to get technology into the hands of all of the young people that we were serving, making sure that broadband access was available to them, but really trying to get them to understand where their inner strength was to make that transition from going from an in-person learner to a virtual learner. Once we were able to shift that thinking for them, and help them understand they were actually being trained to become remote workers, which was really becoming an opportunity for employment. Employers were starting to look for people who knew how to produce in that virtual world. And so we were able to fulfill that gap. Also learning digitally, not having the close connections that we have here at HopeWorks, but there's a burgeoning, growing tech ecosystem that's happening in our region. And so here's an opportunity for people to connect to programs like HopeWorks, Launch Code, Resilient Coders, Prescolas. This burgeoning ecosystem is also telling employers that there's talent here in Philadelphia. So I think that this has also been a huge opportunity for us to shift some of our thinking and really learn how to work in the remote and virtual space.
This is really a question for everybody because I have found in my travels that sometimes employers don't understand how to appreciate the skill set of their employees. In other words, how do you begin to close the opportunity gap for the workers? How do we get the employers into the conversation as we're talking about leveraging skills that are already existing into jobs that raise people's level of income in a higher degree? So anyone's willing to join in that conversation, we'd love to have you jump in. Raphael, why don't you start?
Thanks. I think that as you're presenting, there is that conception that sometimes positions may require a degree. So internally at Congreso, what we're trying to do is try to identify those responsibilities and identify what are the skill sets that are needed. And then maybe they don't need a bachelor's degree or an associate degree. And we're trying to give opportunity for many of our participants that are, being trained at Congreso. And what we want to do is start that opportunity. Many of them do internship at Congreso. We want to start hire them, some of them as part-timer, a full-timer. We have been interviewing actively in the last 3 months. And then we want to approach other nonprofits in our area and go outside and say, you know what? We have had this experience with these participants that went through this training, that achieved this skill. And now by working at Congreso, they may have all those kind of, skills that are required for a social service agency. And hoping that some other agency will share with us that new commitment that you can review all those entry-level requirements for these positions and try to see if they do really need a bachelor's degree, or it would be more important to have the skills that are needed and the experience that our participant may have. So that's what we're trying to do, be a role model and try to walk the walk in this area.
Mm-hmm. Andrea, what about you in terms of your way that you make in the world in which you touch so many people? What are your thoughts on getting employers involved in this conversation?
The interesting thing is that I think employers let me start here. Research has shown, and I've been doing this work nationally, so I've only just become a radio show host in the last 4 years and really at WRD for the last 1. But I have been doing this work as an implicit bias trainer with educators and police officers around the country for almost 30 years. And so when we travel and we do this work, the employers would say, research has shown that hiring someone without a college degree, but that was willing to work hard, has netted more results for them, right, over time. And so the idea is to get the employers to actually pay attention to the people, not just look at the college degrees, but look at the skill sets that they're bringing to the table, look at how hard they're working, look at their emotional intelligence, how are they able to navigate across the board with people from all walks of life. That is very important. And so when we talk about hiring, we also look at every facet of society. So the district attorney's office through G. Lamar Stewart has the one-stop job hub where they, have employers coming in to help people who are returning citizens. There are thousands of them in the city of Philadelphia, right? And so there are places for them to find jobs too. We also on WURD, and I'm sure Tiffany will talk about this at some point, we have psychologists who will come in and offer free services, free sessions, because we have to think of the whole person. It's one thing to give them a job, but trauma in the Black and Brown communities is a huge issue that we're not even discussing or tapping into, right? So those are the two things that I really want us to pay attention to. So if an employer is looking at us right now, in the middle of having this discussion, I want them to stop and think about that employee that is an excellent worker. And the only reason why they can't get promoted is because you're looking at the paper that says they do not have a college degree, right? And so a college degree does not make you an excellent worker. It gives you a certain pedigree that says you've completed a certain amount of courses. But we've met plenty of folks with college degrees who think the college degree will land them into higher places instead of wanting to do the work. And so take another look at that person who may not have the college degree, but is willing to step up, as Raphael is saying, from Congreso, and give them an opportunity and watch them grow. We've seen folks like that. One guy who wanted to go to college at Morgan State, could not afford to do it, started at UPS as a truck driver, is now a CEO and went back and gave $20 million to Morgan State. So we cannot afford to alienate the folks who may not have the college degrees at this point. Pull them into the fold if they're willing to work hard. It's the Fred factor.
Oh, well said. What about you, Tiffany? What are your thoughts?
Absolutely. I'd like to echo much of what Andrea just said, and also to consider employers, the employees that you have. Do you have buy-in from them? Are you even looking for buy-in from them to use their skill set that is not included in their job description? Are they able to elevate with the things that they are passionate about? Check your culture. What is the office culture? You could be repelling amazing employees simply because the office culture is toxic. And how you look at those, like Andrea was saying, those who do not have a degree or an advanced degree, because we're seeing that having a bachelor's is starting to look like having a high school diploma, depending on what the job is. They want you to have a master's degree when you can clearly do the job with a bachelor's or a high school diploma. So look at the culture. What do you want from the employee? Are they giving the best that they can because they really feel invested? Are they using all of their skills? And I don't want to take too much time, but I can say for a fact, if you have a very creative self-starter who sees that they have an opportunity to create a unique space in your organization, they will do so much work if you give them that opportunity to create that space and not set up a bunch of boundaries around them based on red tape of their degree or what have you. Give them the opportunity to excel, and you never know where they can take your company, your organization, just on their sheer will.
Those are great conversations to have, and well said once again. Alia, on the other side of things, as you are training people to move into positions and upgrade their skill sets and move into higher paying jobs, are you finding that there is that sort of boundary that employers tend to have, and saying this person needs to have this credential in order for me to even consider them? How do you reach those employers? How do you overcome that? And is that an issue from your experience?
Yeah, this is an excellent question, because employer engagement has been on the top of mind for all workforce programs. And what we found here is we have to identify what the pain point is for the employer, right? And then we have to meet that need. And what we found is creating opportunities for employers to get involved with our young people, hosting mock interview days, tapping into their volunteer programs that they have with their employees, inviting those employees in to meet our young people. Once they see how great our young people are, those employees go back to the employer and say, we need to create a pipeline and a relationship here. And if they have a commitment to their DEI strategy, we are able to provide Black and brown young people with the tech skills. And that's what another thing, the degrees are important for certain high level positions, but in tech, what you'll find is really employers want to know, can you do the job? And so our young people create portfolios, and they're taught on how to present those portfolios to employers. Employers want to see, do you have the skill set? So providing those things, we do customized training also for employers. So when I talked earlier about finding that pain point, what is the customized training? And you can find that we can get young people to those mid-level positions by doing customized training and fueling the need and fulfilling that need that employers have. So really, employer engagement strategies are critical to workforce programs, and really beginning to learn how to engage them and understand that there's a reciprocity. It's not just we need employers also need us to fuel their talent pipelines as well. So for workforce programs, really beginning to have those conversations, not, oh, please hire our folks, but yes, I am here to fulfill a need that you have.
What about you, Irv? You, as a journalist and as heading up the oldest and most storied Black-owned publication, what are your thoughts on that kind of barrier that often exists for those who might be very capable, but have to face the boundaries that people put, those employers put in the way of achievement?
Well, I think we also have, we were talking about the occupational gap. I think we also have an information gap. And those of us who are in media need to also be aware that depending on the field, healthcare, STEM, the employers are looking for people and are desperate for people, and people are not connecting to what those opportunities are. So I think we also have to connect make that connection that in some cases, there's a huge demand and there are not enough workers that employers are on again, are aggressively looking for people and are willing to work with people who are, that they can train on the job and may not have all the requisite skills, but they will train them themselves to do the job. And that there's just not enough awareness that these jobs exist. So we have to help make that connection. So it depends on what the job is. Again, healthcare, STEM, information technology, all of those areas, they're desperate. So but maybe a number of people are not thinking about those jobs and do not know that those opportunities exist.
Right, and that is again the power and the value of the media that's represented here on this panel today, and being able to have those conversations and to provide that information. I'm going to see if I can draw Keith Wardrip once again, a Community Development Research Manager for the Fed. Certainly, the tool that you've been sharing with us is really all about raising employers' awareness about that opportunity to leverage skills to find better opportunities. I wonder if you can talk a bit more about how we can reach to those employers who might have, they might have been leaning on those credentials almost as a crutch, rather than really seeing employees and the potential that they could bring to a job.
Yeah, I'd love to. I think my co-panelists have made some really excellent points, and they've said almost everything that I would say now. I'll just add a little bit. So I think it was Andrea mentioned pain points, and she also either Andrea or Alia mentioned diversity, equity, inclusion. There was an announcement made last year by the Business Roundtable that 80 members of the Business Roundtable have committed to emphasizing the value of skills rather than degrees, and they directly linked this initiative to improving equity and diversity and eliminating unintentional bias. So I think that was the pain point they were trying to address. I do think, though, that a better case needs to be made about how this hiring for skills rather than credentials can be good for a company's bottom line. You know, I think that the researchers like myself and others need to do a better job of actually assessing how hiring for skills and not degrees can lead to higher levels of retention, lower costs for hiring, greater productivity, better job performance, greater satisfaction with the job for the worker because the worker hasn't been underemployed in a position, loyalty to the employer itself. So I think for companies that aren't motivated by diversity, but they're motivated by the bottom line, I think research can try to quantify the impacts of rethinking their hiring processes and emphasizing skills rather than potentially unnecessary credentials.
Thank you so much, Keith. And now what I'd like to do is I'd like to open up the conversation to our audience. You're absolutely invited to post your questions in the Q&A section or in the chat. And we have this tremendous resource available among our panel members. And I do have some questions that I'm going to throw out there to kick things off. And this might be really a nice transition from our previous conversation, and that is to Dr. Generals and Dr. Carroll. How are colleges working to with employers to make the case that these skills translate specifically around retail and food service jobs? That's a question that one of our audience members shared with us. Dr. Generals, what are your thoughts on that?
Sure. We have a staff who works directly with businesses throughout the city. And I think someone mentioned contract training opportunities. We speak specifically about the skills that they might need. You know, a lot has been said about the automation of the economy. And the reality is that it's not necessarily jobs that are becoming automated, but it's certain parts of those jobs that are becoming automated. So for existing employees, incumbent employees, there's a huge need to train up, to skill up in some of these digitizations and automation aspects. So we have people who work with employees. We have an apprenticeship program that ties into our academic programs. That too is designed through advisory groups to identify specific skills that companies and businesses need that we should be teaching to. So it's a significant part of our workforce. The division is workforce economic innovation. So it's a significant part of what we do by way of contract training and customer training services opportunities.
Dr. Carroll?
Thank you. As you may know, Pierce is an applied college, so that all of our programs are geared with practitioners in mind. Similar to what Dr. General said, We have advisory councils and partnerships with firms, nonprofits, corporations throughout the region. And we look to them to not only work with us by providing input on what skills are necessary and what lifelong learning would look like, because we do agree not all jobs need a particular degree at a certain time. However, most careers need lifelong learning. And how does that look? And how can we make that very fluid? So we have over 60 corporate partners that we provide information sessions. Now they're virtual, unfortunately, but we view that as very important. And we're able to take the academic side, which defines learning outcomes, and marry that up with the skills that are identified and make sure down to the course level that we can deliver what an employer wants.
Our next question is really a combination of two questions. So the question is, do any of these programs focus on addressing the needs of returning citizens or workers over the age of 50? Is there a need to promote targeted programs for these specific populations? Who would like to take that one on? Let's
very quickly mention that we do have a reentry program that enables returning citizens to come to the college. We help facilitate their registration and their advisement and their counseling. Of course, in some cases, depending on the crime they committed, there may be some limitations relative to financial aid and so forth, but we help them navigate through all of that. In addition to providing the social, the psychological, counseling support, and try to stand them on their feet. And then they take courses like every other student. We really try to transition them to assimilate them into the college as opposed to leaving them, sort of isolated in a particular area. So we do have a very aggressive reentry program.
Right. Excellent. That is true. Dr. Carroll, you wanted to add something?
Well, yes, as well. That's a focus area of ours. And in many cases, while folks are incarcerated, they'd like to pursue their education. And there's an opportunity to do that as well. And then certainly in returning, all of those services that Dr. Generals just talked through are absolutely essential.
Raphael and Alia, talk to us about any programs that you also might have that address either returning citizens or those who are coming into the workforce at a later stage in their lives. Raphael?
At Congreso, yes, even though we don't have any specific program for returning citizens, our programs are open to them. So some of our programs, for example, I was mentioning the CDLA program, Careers in Tracking. That's a program that is funded through Philadelphia Works. And most of them have to be like a WIOA participants or TANA participants. As long as they meet the requirements, we are able to serve them. And we have served them in the past. And also we're working with foundation like Lenfes Foundation to see if we can expand more of our slot number so we can serve anyone that is interested in this type of opportunities. It's the same with any program at Congreso. We help to the most that we can, and we welcome anyone that is interested in reaching out to Congreso, and we will be happy to guide them through the process.
Alia?
Yes, so our focus is on youth and young adults up to age 26. However, we consider ourselves a low barrier to entry program, which means you just basically have to meet the age requirement and be committed to wanting to transform your life. So it's not uncommon for us to have youth who are justice involved come into the program. It doesn't preclude them. Our door is open. Really, it's just about the age requirement for us.
This might be a challenge question for our members of the media, but how can we best get this type of information into the hands of workers who can most use it? Andrea?
Consistency is key. So every month on the source, we have programming that shows up every other Tuesday, every other Thursday. Once a month, we talk about CCP. Once a week, we talk about things around implicit bias and education in the school districts. And we also highlight any entrepreneur that wants to come on. So in opening up the doors for them, it invites people to listen and to hear where they can get the kind of solutions to the issues they may be having at home. It is not an easy thing to do, but one of the things I've always said is this: those of us with a microphone has a very powerful task in front of us. And so we have to use it with due diligence and fidelity. And if it means that we're to help the people that are in our community, then that is what we're supposed to do. Right? So we do it on The Source. We have all sorts of great programming around education, jobs, pivoting, entrepreneurship, health and wellness. We even invite them to even invite doctors on that looks like them, because we don't trust the healthcare system, right? And so that's how we introduced them to Dr. Ayla before anybody knew about Dr. Ayla. It was on WRD. So we try to find the folks that will help and enhance the lives of people. So we just tell them to tune in, but they can't tune in if we don't have the kinds of programming that they want to hear. So we're very intentional about what our programming is. And then we invite people to tell us what is it that they want to hear from us. And we have those people on.
Right. Miguel and Hernan, what about that question about reaching the audiences that you reach with this kind of information? What are your thoughts, Miguel?
So I've been very excited about what I'm hearing on here today. And actually, as we're continuing this chat, I am messaging the link to the app, the one that takes you through the careers, and I'm messaging ideas to some of our producers here for not just NBC, but specifically for Telemundo, because this is all information, the training programs, the how to transition from one job to a career that I think our viewers are anxious for. This is something that can be very productive and life-changing for people that have been in a very scary place for not just this last year, but obviously it's been exacerbated this last year. So I think as a news medium that is catering to the Latino community here, especially on the Telemundo side, we owe them these resources. And so doing a story on it isn't enough, but obviously providing links, providing where they can find more information if they are to apply to these programs, if they do want to figure out a way to do it. I think that's just one of the many things we can do to help.
Right. And Hernan, just by the very fact that you're sponsoring this panel discussion, your boots are on the ground, but can you also share with us what Aldea is doing to forward this conversation?
Yeah, we want, as Erwin probably said it earlier, focus on the solution part of this, opposed to the problem that we have. I think we have plenty of great stories to share, or the people that have overcome challenges. Remember, I said before, adversity is not new to us. Adversity has been with us all along, and we are very gritty people, and we are strengthened, I would say, by the current challenges. So we want to report on those people that have overcome the challenge and the issue of the entrepreneurs that we mentioned earlier. We want to continue reporting what's happening in those people that, without having a job, they decided to start a business. And today's edition of Aldea is a good example of that. This guy that probably none of you know him. He's a guy who started a company only 3 years ago, and now he's a multi-million-dollar business that is breaking ground in a new area for Latin entrepreneurship, and that is the energy sector. So to me, to report on this kind of stories is probably better than dwell on the problems, right? The challenge that we'll always have. No, the challenges are the opportunity for us to bounce back and do something about it. Entrepreneurs lead the way. Beyond that, the great story that we are exploring now is what happened with the kids of these entrepreneurs. What they're going to be, what's their life going to look like. They are going to college. There are 3.6 million Latino students now enrolled in colleges all across the country. That story is better than the 11 million that media keeps talking about, undocumented Latinos living in the country. The 3.6 were U.S. citizens, most of them, are already enrolled in higher education, looking for a better life. And that's the kind of story that we like to report more often, the best of the American Latino experience.
That is wonderful. And it's really about telling those stories that don't get told, giving voice to those who don't normally have the opportunity to have that voice being shared. And Irv, certainly the Philadelphia Tribune is really has a history of doing exactly that. So tell us more about how you're getting the word out on all the opportunities that are available.
Yes, I think we have to continue to highlight the stories of those, the success stories of those who are making the successful pivot, and also provide the information about a lot of things that we're talking about today in this discussion. I just think the Occupational Mobility Explorer program is just, I really like it. I think it's fantastic. And we definitely need to tell let our readers know about that. And what's happening at our community colleges and our nonprofits. Hopefully we're already doing that. But of course, as there'll be more new exciting programs to continue to talk about, and to really highlight those who have a track record in helping people move forward in their pathway. We do not want people to get the wrong information. And so our job as media is to vet, to make sure that people are not investing their time and money in things that will be a scam or not really will result in jobs. In our community colleges and the nonprofit programs that are cited here all have a long track record. So it's not only important to talk about what's happening, but make sure that we're giving people the correct and factual information, and highlight those who are making this successful pivot.
Great. And Tiffany, very quickly, because we have one more question before the end of this program, but the source is clearly the source and has lots of great information. And it sounds like even in the process of having this panel discussion, there's so many stories to be told that I'm sure will be told by the people that are present here that are members of the media. But do you have a quick comment on that as well?
Yes, I do. I also want to encourage people to check out our website, WURDradio.com. We have an initiative called Livelihood. That is where you can find lots of resources, stories about people who are making it work, resources for employees and employers. So that is a great place to check out what's going on in the community and to find some inspiration and information. So go to WURDradio.com/lively-hood and check us out.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Our last question from our audience is, what is the role of government and philanthropy in creating, funding, and promoting programs like this? And actually, I'd like to get Keith to comment on that, because he's got this, the feds have this wonderful tool. How do we leverage the tool in a larger way with the support of the institutions like government and philanthropy? Keith?
Really good question. I think one of the strengths that philanthropy especially, but also government really bring to this conversation, to this opportunity, is the ability to fund innovation. I think that philanthropy in particular can be nimble, and they can be groundbreaking, and they can dedicate their resources to trying something new to have a social impact. They can fund pilot programs that might test the capacity of skills-based hiring, the capacity of assessing and identifying and hiring for, and then looking at the outcomes for hiring folks based on their skills. I think that if with a few pilots, it could be that the message would gain some traction. It would be an easier message to tell to employers. It would be with a history of successes proven out by the research, it would be an easier story to tell to students and to workers. So I think that my answer would be, let's see if we can encourage philanthropy and government to fund innovation and to test some things that we think could work, but we need to prove that they work.
Wonderful. Well, we are almost out of time, but I'm going to give Dr. Guy Generals the last word on this one.
Certainly. I believe government does have a responsibility to support, to fund education as well as training. Training, especially in some of the technical areas, are quite expensive, and we couldn't do it without government support. But finally, I would be remiss if I did not mention the Octavius Cattle Scholarship that the government, specifically Mayor Kinney and the mayor's office, supported, allowing any student graduating from a Philadelphia high school to come to the community college for free. But in addition to that, they each get basic needs support of up to $1,500 per semester. And there's an entire array of support services by way of counseling and advising and so forth. So, you know, there's a lot of discussion about training and a lot of discussion about getting students into education, but if they can't afford it or if they're not inspired to get there, it's all for naught. So I think the government, that's an example of what the government can do to support these efforts. And
Well,
so that would be my final, my final word. Octavius, Cato Scholarship, ccp.edu for anyone
right.
within my sound of my voice.
That is an awesome, awesome resource. And hopefully more people will hear about this opportunity to get their college education at CCP for free. And it's open to all Philadelphia graduates of Philadelphia schools. And it doesn't really matter, right, Guy, if they are fresh graduates or graduates from a couple of years back, right?
Public or private. If they graduated from a Philadelphia high school, they have to apply through financial aid. They're qualified. It's last dollar scholarship. So whatever financial aid they would have coming to them, that doesn't cover the cost of fees and tuition the scholarship will cover. So it's roughly $48 million that the city has invested in this educational plan.
Well, let's make sure that money gets spent. And I want to thank you all for joining us for this Back to Work, Leveraging Your Skills to Find Better Opportunities 2021 Aldea Roundtable, also sponsored by the Federal Reserve. This has been a very important conversation, and I have learned so much in this last hour or so. And we want to thank all of our panel members, Dr. Guy Generals, President, Community College of Philadelphia, Dr. Mary Ellen Caro, who is President and CEO of Pierce College, Miguel Valle Martinez, reporter for NBC 10, Telemundo 62, Hernan Watacao, Editor-in-Chief and CEO of Aldea News, Keith Wardrip, who is Community Development Research Manager, Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia, Rafael Arismendi, who is Vice President of Education and Workforce Services, Congreso de Latinos Unidos, Alia Sutton Bay, Director of Operations and Youth Development, HopeWorks Camden, Andrea Lawful Sanders, Word Radio, also from Word, Tiffany Bacon, and Irv Randolph, Managing Editor of the Philadelphia Tribune. And thanks to all of our audience members who have tuned in and also have shared their questions and comments with us. Hopefully you learned a lot, and please share the word about this tremendous tool that the Federal Reserve is offering to us, and continue the conversation in your communities so that we can make sure that more people are able to find family-sustaining jobs in the city of Philadelphia. I'm Lorraine Ballard Morrill. Thank you so much for joining us today, and have a wonderful rest of the day.